Okay, so now it's time for our first panel discussion of the day. So please welcome the first member of our panel, Caroline Jarrett. Caroline is the forms specialist as well as a UX expert. She advises organisations on how to make forms easier, improve websites and business processes. Her latest book is Surveys That Work, a practical guide for designing and running better surveys. Go buy it. Round of applause for Caroline.
Yeah. The second member of the panel is Vicky Tainaki. Vicky is a designer and UX lead at Student Loans Company. She's worked across UK government at Government Digital Service, Department of Work and Pensions, and HM Revenue and Customs as a user researcher and interaction designer. And she also has a background as a developer. Welcome, Vicky, to the stage.
We're also joined by Ellis Capon. Ellis is a product person on the design system at Just Eat Takeaway, making your experience when ordering that post-night out Mackie D's just a little bit better. Welcome, Ellis.
Also on the panel is Frankie Roberto. Frankie Roberto is a lead interaction designer who has worked on several services across different government departments, including Apply for Teacher Training and Ethnicity Facts and Figures. He's also an experienced contributor to the design community and the GOV.UK design system.
And our final member and facilitating this discussion is Deborah Dada. Deborah is a product designer at Store Lab, focusing on crafting meaningful user experiences and simplifying complex business solutions. Please give a round of applause to Deborah.
Okay, and we'll hand over to Deborah to take over.
Hi guys, I hope that we're having a good day and we're sure gonna be having fun this afternoon, or rather morning. So to start with our conversations, we're gonna be talking about how design systems manage contributions. And I have Frankie, I have Ellis, I have Caroline, and I also have Vicky here today. And one of the first things we are going to be talking about is, are contributions important in the first place? Are contributions necessary? And I'm going to start with Frankie because it seems to have contributed to the UK design system a lot. So I want to know, are they even important in the first place?
Well, I think they are, and I think one of the reasons they are is because ultimately the design system is as good as it is actually used in practice. And so it's really important to get that feedback loop from the teams who are actually using it in services being used by users. So the contribution is a way of like gathering that insight back from the people who are implementing it back into the design system community. So yeah, I think it is important. And to making sure that the design system is grounded in sort of actual use case.
Interesting. So are there specific advantages that you would like to point to as to why contributions are important for design systems?
Well, I think, yeah, it's a way of enabling that insight that comes from teams to be shared, right? Which is easier said than done. But often, the design system team, whoever's managing a design system in an organization, might not be as close to the front line as the teams who are actually working on services. So those teams who are working on services might have a need that isn't met by current things in the design system. And so by contributing it back, it means that they can work with other teams to sort of share best practice and also sort of distribute that to teams who don't yet know they have that need, but might sort of come to it in the future. So yeah, I think that's the kind of basic principle.
Yeah.
The practice is harder.
Exactly. And I remember when Steve was talking the other time, he mentioned that they are able to save the entire government a lot of money based on design systems and the contributions that we have. And the process reduces the amount of work that every other department or every other sector of the government has to actually go through to complete their task. So definitely, I agree with you on that. And I'll be talking to Vicky next, and I would like to know what a good design system is. What's the best design system contribution process that you have experienced? What would you say the best process is?
Oh, that's a tough one. The one I can talk to a lot is the GOV.UK design systems. Or maybe I'll talk about what I think is important with it. To riff off Frankie's element, it is the idea that it's living. The best thing is something that's used, and understanding that things can change. A good design system shows that something is currently seen as the thing to do as a default, something that we used to do but isn't so good anymore, something which is only in particular situations. A design system, systems are living things. And remembering that it's not just a library, it's not something that never changes, it's something that we can use but also challenge.
All right, so interesting to see that you are looking at it from a system point of view, and in my mind I'm thinking of the respiratory system of the body and how it's more like a continuous process. The same thing keeps repeating itself again. So it means there's a process to it. So what do you think is the first process of a design system contribution?
So if something's entirely new, I think thinking about what's the problem you're trying to solve, and is there something which is already there, which you can start from. So if the answer is yes, you try using that, you see if it works, maybe it does. But if it doesn't, then you start to go, why not? Do we need to do some research? Do we need to tweak it a bit more? And then, at that point, when you've started to do a process and go, no, actually, this is possibly a new thing, and then doing your due diligence and thinking, if something is new, what is our criteria for looking at it? For example, government is quite rightly a lot about accessibility. We start with that. We start about making sure we're consistent, making sure we think about mobile. So I think the first step is to remember that it's not about being new, it's about checking what's already there and just being quite careful and rigorous. And then it makes it even all the more better when you want to try and contribute that new thing.
Wow, interesting. That's great. I think the next conversations we're going to be having is to talk about what are the tips that you should actually consider when working with contributors in the design system. So there are basic things that you should put in mind as designers, as developers, as the entire member of the team of a design system. So what are those tips that you think stand out for you, Ellis?
Yeah, good question. So everyone's got context here. I work for Just Eat Takeaway, a private organisation. Beforehand, I worked for GOV.UK, and I worked on the GOV.UK, which became the News Corp design system News Kit. And these are two very different companies, Just Eat and News Corp. News Corp's a political beast in all senses of the word. And we had brands within the UK like the Times, the Sun, TalkSport, and then in the US we had Dow Jones, Wall Street Journal, etc., etc., etc. So you can imagine the kind of struggles that we had trying to implement some kind of contribution model here. There were so many opinions in the room, so I think it was very hard for us to get contribution off the ground because there were too many opinions, and I don't think, reflecting on it now, I don't think our research was good enough. I think earlier on it got mentioned that you kind of shut down the loudest voice in the room by backing up with data and research. So I think in hindsight, we probably would have done things a bit differently there. If I look now at Just Eat Takeaway, it's a younger company. It has much less decision makers in the room. They're kind of working as one united brand together, and so therefore, we don't. I think in News Corp we spent literally a year throwing this model back to the US teams, back to the UK teams. Oh no, that's not going to work because so and so thinks this, yada yada yada. And at Jet, it's just kind of like, we'll just let them go for it now. I think we'll just let people have a go. contribute it. The design system, we have a team, a dedicated team. We are still the gatekeepers for further contribution. But we've not really worried about all this process and politics, and we've just kind of said, go have a play and see what happens, because you can't break anything.
Wow, interesting. So it means that stakeholders are a huge part of the design system contributions, and that will lead me to talk to Caroline on that. What would you say is the role of stakeholders, and is there a limit to how much stakeholders influence a design system contribution?
I think that we've all had examples of design systems which have had varying amounts of support from senior management and other stakeholders. So I worked on what became the GOV.UK design system. I was just reminiscing with Tim Paul about, at the time, it was a skunkworks project originally. I wouldn't say we didn't have the support of stakeholders, but it certainly wasn't explicit. And that changes some of the dynamics. So Amy, who recently wrote on about how sometimes in design systems, people are allowed to do them as a treat from their main work, which seems a contribution model that one or two of us recognise, but isn't really ideal. So I think one of the big challenges is working very early on the contribution model. Like, how do we actually, we often focus on, we need to get all the components in there, and then we'll start thinking about contribution. And I would prefer we try to turn that on its head and focus very much on, let's start on how we're going to get people to do the uptake, to actually start using it, and to start contributing as designers and developers are taking hold of this stuff, and then telling their powers that be, you know what, this is saving us a lot of time, please can we have more of it? So they can help to win support, and we need that contribution help to make sure that the design system is an active, living thing that keeps working. I've seen what we would now call design systems literally wither and die and never be used again because they never had any kind of contribution model. So we don't want that to happen because it's wasting our efforts, really.
Yeah, that's right. And you touched point on the fact that it has to be a continuous process, just that it continues to live. So what would you say that there was a time, maybe when contributing to a design system, and you felt like, oh, we did something wrong here, and we are not able to pass it. This is not technically, for lack of a better word, say usable by another team. Do you have something to say in that regard?
I think perhaps I would like to refer that to one of perhaps Frankie or Ellis, who are closer to the hard end of deciding what their team should use or not use.
Yeah, so it would just say, I would direct that to Frankie, maybe one time where you probably experienced like a pitfall in user design systems contribution, and you felt like, oh, this didn't go as planned. We didn't see this coming.
The hardest thing with the contribution model is figuring out the balance of expectation on the contributor and the central team. And there's a sort of spectrum along that, sort of where it could be that the contribution is just, we have a need for a component or a need for a pattern, and the central team go away and do that work and then deliver it. And other organizations, they might work that way, have a quite tightly controlled central team, do all the design work, and then the sort of the services and the projects are just taking stuff and implementing it. And on the other end of that spectrum is that, great, come to us with a fully formed contribution with all the research, guidance, accessibility testing to back it up. And that's a huge amount of work to ask for people who have got an actual project or service to deliver. So I think just finding the balance between those two things is really tricky, and kind of reflects how the organization is structured, and is the organization more centralized or is it more distributed?
And then there's always, sorry, I'll come back to you, Alice, but there's always the third thing, which is me and my purist ideas, which is, no, you don't need that component. You're actually trying to solve a content design or a service design problem in interaction design. So, the third angle is, don't contribute it, don't make a new one, think again, but that's really hard to build into the model as to when to actually say to people, no, you're trying to solve the problem in the wrong way. Sorry, Ellis, I interrupted you.
No, it's fine, thank you. I was just going to say, one of the roles that the design system team takes at JET is that we do, template a lot of things as well. So when we are, asking for contribution, ideally, they would, whoever's contributing, whatever it may be, whatever artifact it is, would also document it, abide by the definition of done, whatever that is. But, as part of the design system team, we are kind of building these templates in as well, because I know through experience that you never know what's around the corner with what's going on in the world or the economy or what have you. So like it might be that your well-funded centralised design system team, like I've had previously at News Corp, for example, News UK, might not be there anymore. So if you push the collaboration and the contribution side of things further at the beginning, set up the templates, the rules, the patterns, the guidelines going forward, you might not be there in the future to do it, but then at least those best practices are still in place and the user will still ultimately benefit from that.
Great, thank you. I think the next thing we are going to talk about is conflicting requirements and preferences in design systems, and I'm going to be talking to Vicky on that. So what do you think, examples, is there a time where you have experienced conflicting requirements and preferences, and how did you go about that, and are there examples of how you successfully solved that?
I think Caroline and some of the others have discussed a thing about people really want something and it's sort of out in the world, and there's often the point of, do we just need to put something in? And sometimes there's a real need. For example, I think cookie banners, we had regulation coming through, people needed a consistent thing that they could put something in. So that just got put out, and then people sort of said, actually, can we do this in a better way, make it easier for users? And it was just having that discussions about sometimes something just gets put out there just to be consistent, to save people time, but it's not the best, it's just the best for now. So I think that's one of this concept of a living thing. Sometimes it's better use of everyone's time to just get something out there, but keep reminding them it doesn't mean it's perfect, it's just a stopgap, and then we can develop it.
Oh, great. Thank you. I'll go back to Frankie, and we'll be talking about communication. It's very important in contribution. I know we have a Slack channel for communities for UK design system, and I would like to say, what are the other processes that should be put in place or should be enforced for a great design system contribution?
Well, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that, actually, you can design quite formal processes and templates and ask people to contribute in a certain way, but ultimately I find it's that kind of personal connection that actually counts. So it's like getting to know the team on a human level so that they recognize each other and build that connection with the people, from the centralized design system team and the services. And I think that probably counts for a lot more, but obviously that takes time to build up, and that requires going to meetings and chatting socially and having a Slack channel. And I think those sort of slightly more intangible human connections actually count for quite a lot. As I'm sure we'll find out later this afternoon, it's often down to the people.
I wanted to add that workshops are actually a thing as well. Events like this are also a thing where we onboard new people, new contributors to the team, and tell them what has been done before. There's a living document that they can go through and say, okay, this is our processes, this is how we do things, and this is how we intend, this is our projection for the future. You understand as well. So I think that's a very important process.
Can I also jump in there?
Yes,
before
please.
we move on, to say that I think we all here really appreciate that making the personal connections, whether in person or through online events or channels and so on. We also have to recognise, I think, some of the privilege that allows us to do that. That whether we're freelancers and we've made the decision to take time away from our paid work, maybe our bosses or other stakeholders have allowed us to be here. So it's great that we have that privilege, and we also have to think about how do we find ways of involving people who haven't got that privilege? How do we make sure that we're not accidentally excluding voices? And across organisations, for example, one of the things I have rarely seen, and if anyone has done this, I'd be so happy to hear from you. I've rarely seen it being explicit in anyone's performance management agreement or statement of work that as part of your duties, this team will be to contribute to the design system, for example. So, or indeed to the research repository. It's the same as we heard from our opening keynote. So it's like we need to be also aware of that building in ways that we can reward and recognise and give people space is perhaps a very important stakeholder thing. I see Vicky and Ellis sort of nodding and wanting to contribute as well.
I'll start from government. I think certainly for those in government, those that aren't aware of what happens with the UK government, we have regular assurance points, and there's points about contribution. We put recommendations. If something's amazing, please put it with please put it to the design system team. There was actually a design objective for all the designers saying that community contribution counted. I think my current work, we've actually got an objective for my UXers about scaling UX. So there are a few models out there, but Caroline's completely right. Again, a system needs to be systemic. You need to create space for people to do it as legitimate time, not just because they care about it and they're able to somehow make the time.
Yeah, to build on that as well, at Jet, we have a lot of different kind of areas of the business that you probably don't know about. You know, you got to think when a driver comes to deliver your food or your groceries, we also have apps across various countries for that as well. So we split the organisation up into these consumer, logistics, the partner and restaurants, and example. And so on that, we are now running a pilot with the logistics team, who are based in both Germany and Canada, to basically then in some people's performance objectives to instill these contribution and maintenance objectives within their performance development reviews. So it was a long process of going to the directors and the leadership of that area, and teeing this up quite far in advance, because you can't just do it like that, because we've got all the cycles and what have you. So now we have a group of, I think, about 8 design system advocates just in the logistics area, who work with our engineers and designers and researchers, who are the mentors for the design system, who meet with them regularly, feedback on certain topics, and we use that as not only a mechanism to get feedback from them, but also, they should, if they're to hit their objectives, be making a contribution to the system, enhancing the token usage in their system, in their products. So we are trying to do that, but it's not as easy as just hitting someone with a stick, like somebody said earlier on.
Yeah, that's right. Moving on, we just talk about feedback. How do we take feedback in design contributions? Knowing that this design system contributes to, in the public sector, it contributes to other sectors of the government. In private sectors, contributes to other arms of the businesses. So how do we manage feedback? And I think I would like everyone to speak on this, starting from Caroline.
Well, one of the things I say in the world of surveys, which I think most of you know aren't my favourite, but we have to kind of deal with them, is the minimum is if you ask someone a question, you need to do something to the answer. So if you're creating a contribution model or way of, at the end of a page, you might say, was this page any good? The absolute minimum you have to build in is for someone to read that stuff and, acknowledge it. So you need to have a very basic acknowledgement. Thanks. Even if it's to say, thank you for letting us know about something, we will be putting it, we'll be considering it at our next meeting in 2027. But at least there's some kind of acknowledgement. And even perhaps to say, because at the moment, just borrowing an example, at the moment we're fully focused on upgrading everything to WCAG, whatever. So at least you've told people when it's going to happen. So I think just making sure there is that kind of feedback loop. I'm not sure if that's the sort of feedback you meant, but in contributions.
Yeah, that's it.
But I can see Vicky has a thought as well.
I don't know how many of you follow the work of K.A. McKercher. They do a lot of stuff to do with co-design and the like, but they have a good model where they say co-design, proper, doing things with people, they do things together, that's great. But what's not great is saying you're going to do it and it's just consultation. And I think, again, with systems, sometimes things just have to happen. Again, sometimes something gets rushed out. It's actually about managing people's expectations and saying, there's something coming out, actually we need to push this through, but if you can wait or if you can deal with some other things, your feedback is going to be really useful on something else or another scenario. People are pragmatic, they understand we're all building the plane while we're flying it, and it's better to help people understand what's going on. Sometimes things just have to get done, but it's better just to give people that understanding.
Yeah, right. Alice?
Yeah, I think teams that use our systems are always under pressure to deliver for deadlines and things, right? So you can't be too critical of somebody who's made the effort to go through and actually contribute something to your system. I think, having an understanding of what's coming up for people. So hiring a product manager would be great, and having that kind of 6-month year vision about actually, X team is going to be delivering this in the future, and that's one of our targets. You can then help tee that up so that then the feedback isn't as, it can be quite damaging to people, and you don't want to put people off from contributing to your system. So if you have a bit of foresight into what's coming up, I think that can also help with that as well. And so when you're delivering that feedback, you can be more constructive with it and actually pair with them, fix a problem with them, and actually bring them along that journey, rather than, shut them down and scare them off.
You're right. Common. Alice, you wanna? Sorry.
Yeah, I think this feedback's really hard actually. Like, I'm sure a lot of design system teams don't actually have much of a clue about how it's used because you don't get much feedback. It takes time for teams to figure out what to say and to navigate GitHub and all that kind of thing. So I suspect the default is no feedback, which is quite difficult. So anything is better than that. But yeah, getting people to contribute feedback, I would just like to see screenshots of how things have been used in practice as a designer, just to sort of see how things have been used. So even if the feedback is, yeah, it was great and here's how we're using it, I think it'd be good to see more of it, but it's hard to get that.
Great. I think getting maybe a metrics where you see an heat map to know how guys are using this can also be a great way to also get feedback. And I think we have all touched point on really great insights that how we can get feedback. And finally, we'll be talking about the future of design systems and how contributions will evolve. So I want us all to talk about this. And I think that we don't know how much time and effort all of these components, elements, guide that has been put together and the entire guidelines, how much they reduce effort that people put into actually solving the real problems, and they don't have to worry about what it looks like, how the interaction works. They focus on the other things that matter to their own sector. So what would you say is the future of design systems, Alice?
I think, I don't know, it's a big one. I think, the component library, I don't think we need to focus, component libraries aren't the future, obviously. I think they are one of the main artifacts of it, obviously. However, I think what you mentioned, focusing on the things that we know works for our users, focusing on the things that are important that we know are going to be consistent across a group of products. I'm thinking your headers, your footers, your account areas and things like that are quite similar across any brand, let alone any organization. I think that is something that is probably going to be looked at more in the future, and this templating idea of collections and groups of components that build up this template of an account or a checkout or something that is very similar, I think might be something that teams actually look at. So if we can figure out a way that teams can document and feed this back into or contribute this back into the process of, we know this works, it can be used elsewhere in the business or in the organization, that'll be, so contributing templates rather than contributing.
Great one. Frankie?
Well, I've got two ideas. I think as design systems sort of mature, it's less about building out the breadth of components, because most of them are there. There might be some more for different types of services. But I think it's about scaling up the design system. And so I think, two ideas. One is to move the design system more closer to the actual implementation. A lot of design systems are about HTML and CSS, and maybe like the GOV.UK design system Nunjucks, which is kind of mostly used by designers at the very beginning of the project. But a lot of developers are actually implementing designs, so using other languages. So looking at how you sort of connect the design system to other templating languages, which is a big topic, and I think would help to bridge the gap between design and implementation. And then I think the other thing is sort of moving higher up the abstraction tree, is that the right metaphor? So it's less about components, but more about the bigger patterns. So I think sign-on systems are a massive topic and deliver huge value, but are sort of much bigger than a small component. But sort of fundamentally, how does your service get people logged in and share data across services? So those kind of bigger, chunkier, high level sort of abstract pieces, I think, are probably the next route about how you scale up design systems, in my head at least.
Yeah, we're at Jet, and tomorrow Ash, who's a principal engineer on my team, is speaking about this, about web components. We've been working on a new web component system for like nearly a year now, and I think we are finding it's a hot topic at the moment in the industry, and using Lit, we are kind of rolling out this new component system that is obviously not specific to one language, and that's an interesting one because people are happy to contribute that, and it's like a much earlier stage now. We're not further down the line where people have to worry about this, but it's at the very beginning, and this is quite an exciting time for us to be able to do that. And it was just the other day where a team actually contributed something, and rather than test it properly, took it to production and broke the entire Just Eat website, which is really good for us. So like,
always helpful
there's
when you don't break
always
the website.
process that you need to get in place before this happens, and communication breakdowns. But yeah.
Yeah, great one.
And yeah, Vicky.
I want to be original. I like a lot of those, but I think two that I think are interesting. One, the people process, the training, what got mentioned this morning in the Scottish Government, that a system can only do so much, but you need to help people use it. And the second one is the understanding that we're dealing with systems that are aging and changing. The internet, the World Wide Web's been around since 1991, but now we're getting all the things like voice UI. Our systems are having to both deal with new stuff, but also keep an eye on the long tail of what's already out there.
Yeah, right, Caroline.
Well, from my point of view, I was pretty thrilled this morning when our speaker was telling us about we had to put some forms guidance into the UI. Yay! Because it's not good enough just to be able to ask a question using a good component. That question has to be one that you need the answer to for your service, and the user can answer. And those things, getting that sort of guidance into how do these things come together to create a really useful, helpful user experience, whether it's on a service or in a private sector, actually making sure that as a customer of Just Eat, I get my pizza at the right time in the right place is really important to me. I'm kind of not too worried about the exact components I interacted with, but I do think the components need to be accessible, but helping people to have some more of that. How do you create a good mixture from the ingredients? How do you add the different things so that the whole thing delivers a really viable, worthwhile, non-excluding experience? I'm really happy to see some more attention going into design systems on that, and I hope that trend really continues.
Thank you. I think just for bonus, Frankie, do you want to give us like a success story of your contribution to design systems so far?
A sausage story, how the sausage is made, you don't want to know. Well, I'll do a little plug at the same time, which is the task list component, is something I started working on with Imran and a bunch of other people, some of who are in this room, about, I think, 24 months ago. But actually, the genesis of that pattern exists way before the GOV.UK design system even existed. I think Caroline worked on it, other people at GDS worked on it back in the day. So it's taking that from a pattern to a component has been a long time. A lot of work has gone into it. And yeah, it does take a lot of time. It's ultimately the kind of thing, and a lot of actually patience, and sort of the ability to try and keep momentum as well, with the kind of contribution. But we're close to the finish line, and if you come to my talk tomorrow, you can see a demo. So.
All right, we'll be looking forward to that. Alice, you have any?
I guess we've Just Eat Takeaways have it's an oldish company, I guess, been around for 20 odd years, and it has always luckily had these kind of principles in place, and then it's bought various companies, merged with various companies, and now we're this big corporation that is a bit hard to navigate with various different frameworks, an iOS application, a set of applications, an Android set of applications, various component libraries for each of these. So now I think it's all about us kind of pulling these together, and we're creating unified token packages. We've got a tokens committee where people come and give their opinions from various different teams and parts of the business on how the tokens should be applied and things like that, and kind of like just trying to push this community side of it through togetherness and getting teams to kind of all contribute to one pot.
Great. That's interesting. Vicky?
Oh, I didn't prepare for this bit. I'm not sure what I'm working on. Stuff that's going on. I just think it's really interesting as someone who's in the GOV.UK design system working group, getting to look at things, think about the principles, trying to figure out how can we be explicit about, when we make decisions so that other people can understand it, is something that's I'm working on is really interesting.
Yeah, great, actually. Caroline?
I think generally I've forgotten what the question was, but it gives me an opportunity just to thank everybody. One of the things that I appreciate with this sort of event is all the hard work that's gone into bringing us together, the opportunities to make some connections. It's fantastic and lovely to see some of the practical things. It's also lovely to hear, for example, from Ellis, where he talks about 3 things I've no idea what he means. I'm like, cool, maybe I'm going to learn from that. And actually, I didn't know about tokens. And so sometimes this sort of thing is as much about broadening out and hearing a few phrases and jargon that you don't know and thinking, oh yeah, I'm going to learn from that and have something else. So I think that's
that's a success in
rambling, but I hope in a positive way.
Yeah, that's a success in itself. And I think with that, we have come to the end of this great panel session. And I'll hand over to the team.
Thank you.